Ms. Oakes, I recognize that your situation involves unique challenges, the representative began. Still, I think we can both agree that remaining employed at Consolidated Oil and Gas might create discomfort, not just for you, but for your colleagues as well. Given the circumstances, we feel the most appropriate path forward would be for you to step down voluntarily, citing personal reasons. Should you choose that route, we'd be more than willing to provide a positive reference and speak highly of your performance to any prospective employer. As soon as the HR rep finished, my body stiffened instinctively. This is it, I thought. I've just been let go. Even though I had braced myself for this possibility, I could feel the sting behind my eyes. Don't you dare cry, I told myself fiercely. Whatever happens, don't cry here. After signing the necessary documents, I slowly walked back to my cubicle. There wasn't much to pack, just a few odds and ends tucked away in drawers and scattered across the shelves. It didn't take more than a few minutes to collect everything into a small cardboard box. And then I found myself walking down the hallway with what felt like the weight of failure in my arms. No one from my team was around to witness my exit, and I couldn't decide if that was a blessing or a curse. Honestly, I was relieved Jerry wasn't there. But I did wish I could have seen Buffalo Bill one last time. I knew where to find him if I really wanted to. But given what he must be thinking of me now, maybe it was best to leave that goodbye unsaid. Then, as if summoned by fate, a dreadful possibility struck me. What if I bumped into Kurt Jorgensen on my way out? That single thought sent a fresh wave of panic washing over me, and the tears came harder. I lowered my head and hurried outside, desperate to reach my old beat-up Toyota and drive to the tiny apartment I'd barely lived in. Once inside, I immediately began tossing things into bags. There wasn't much to pack. In all the time I'd technically lived there, I'd probably spent no more than a few scattered weeks in the space. Field auditors don't exactly lead homebody lives. In fact, I bet long-haul truckers saw their homes more than I did. But all that was behind me now. There was just one thing left, something I'd been putting off. Mom, it's Annie. Would it be okay if I came home? And then, to my horror, I broke down completely. After gathering myself as best I could, I dropped the keys and the rent check for the current month into an envelope for the property manager. Then I got in the car and pointed it toward Tyler. It's not a long drive from Houston to Tyler, just about 200 miles. But it may as well be a trip across an ocean. Heading north on the interstate, memories came flooding back faster than I could push them away. I remembered the nerves and excitement of sitting outside Kurt Jorgensen's office that very first day. It was the start of my first real job, not a seasonal gig, not a college internship, but actual full-time employment. And not just anywhere, at Consolidated Oil and Gas, a global energy giant. Sure, I'd done well at the University of Texas at Tyler, and I'd aced the CPA exam. But still, landing a job at a major corporation had seemed out of reach. I'd assumed I'd end up doing routine bookkeeping for my parents' Rose Nursery back home. Tyler's known as the rose capital of the world, and my parents had worked in the business their whole lives. So when I heard that Consolidated would be recruiting on campus, I applied on a whim. To my astonishment, I was invited to Houston for a second interview. And when the job offer finally came, I knew without a doubt I had to say yes, or regret it forever. I had technically already started a few days earlier, but those first days were just orientation, paperwork, HR meetings, benefit briefings. Now, though, I was ready for my first official assignment. I'd assumed I'd be placed in some corner of the accounting department, so I was a little disappointed to hear I'd be part of the field audit team. Auditing's even more removed from the core of a business than accounting is. You're just reviewing the numbers other accountants have already reviewed. Still, I was in no position to complain. So I waited patiently outside the office of Kurt Jorgensen, one of the heads of the field audit division, and my new boss. When his assistant finally let me in, he rose from behind his desk and gestured for me to sit. He was taller than I expected, probably in his mid-40s, with slicked-back dark hair and a composed, professional demeanor. While other executives in the company leaned into business casual, he wore a full suit, white shirt, and tie, formal, authoritative. His presence filled the room effortlessly. "Miss Oakes," he began as I settled into my chair, "the resources we extract, process, and deliver are the lifeblood of global economies. A disruption in the supply of oil or gas can destabilize nations and bring down entire governments. Our quarterly figures don't just influence stock markets. They're seen as indicators of the world's economic trajectory. He paused before continuing. This means our company is constantly in the public eye, closely monitored by regulators and investors alike. Every financial statement we produce is examined with intense scrutiny. That's why it's absolutely essential that all of our transactions are recorded with precision and reported with consistency. He leaned forward slightly. In addition to accuracy, we must strictly adhere to accepted accounting principles and the standardized practices of the oil and gas sector. He gestured toward the office around him. It's the responsibility of the corporate audit department to enforce these practices across the organization, making sure procedures are applied the same way everywhere. Then he looked at me with a quiet intensity. You've now joined the team tasked with upholding that mission. Are you prepared to carry this weight? I swallowed hard. Yes, sir, I replied. I'm ready. Good, he said, nodding. I expect nothing less than your best. He then rang his secretary and asked her to escort me to meet the rest of the audit department. As I followed her out, I tried to gather my racing thoughts. What a remarkable man, I thought. To him, our work is the heartbeat of the company. I was still processing the interview when we entered a medium-sized office space, partitioned into 3 small cubicles with a round conference table in the middle. She led me to one of the workstations and introduced me to a man named Jerry Higgins. Jerry is our accounting systems expert, she said. Jerry looked strangely familiar, not because I recognized him, but because he resembled the accounting majors I had known back at UT Tyler. He was about average in height, but his shirt buttons strained to contain his round belly. He looked like he could use a haircut. A typical numbers guy, I thought. Then I grinned inwardly, just like me. I offered him a polite hello and asked what he did on the team. That was the last thing I said for a while. Jerry launched into an elaborate explanation of Consolidated's accounting systems that lasted a full 30 minutes. As he talked, my mind wandered back to college and to people like him, especially Tom, a guy I briefly dated in junior year. That relationship lasted about half a semester. After that, I didn't go on many dates. So what do you think? Impressive stuff, huh? Jerry asked suddenly, snapping me back into the moment. I quickly nodded, doing my best to appear enthusiastic, though I hadn't absorbed half of what he said. Well, Jerry went on, I should introduce you to Buffalo Bill. Buffalo Bill? I asked, raising an eyebrow. He chuckled. Yeah, that's Bill Hitchcock, another member of our team. Everyone calls him Buffalo Bill. Oh boy, I thought. What have I gotten myself into? As we approached the next cubicle, Bill must have heard us coming. He stood up right away and reached out to shake my hand. Hi there! I'm Bill Hitchcock, though pretty much everyone calls me Buffalo Bill. And you are? Ann Oaks, I said. Where are you from, Ann? Tyler, Texas, I replied. He gave me a playful grin. Ann Oaks from Texas just doesn't quite work. He squinted slightly, thinking. I think I'll call you Annie Oakley. I studied his face, trying to gauge if he was mocking me, but his warm smile and easy laughter made it impossible not to grin back. To be honest, I didn't mind the nickname. Growing up, I'd been called Orphan Annie more times than I could count. Compared to that, Annie Oakley sounded pretty cool. All right, I said, I'll be Annie Oakley if you tell me how you got stuck with Buffalo Bill. He grinned. Deal. That's just how I say yes. There's not much of a tale to it, he explained. I went to the University of Colorado and got picked to help handle Ralphie, the school's buffalo mascot. We'd run him around the field during football games. One time, Ralphie took off in a frenzy, and all the other handlers lost their grip. I was the only one who held on. From that day on, the nickname stuck. I tried not to laugh too loudly as I pictured Bill being dragged across the stadium by a rampaging buffalo. But I couldn't ignore the nerves bubbling up again, so I changed the subject. Tell me more about your job here. What's it like being an auditor at Consolidated? As Bill launched into his explanation, I listened carefully, hoping to understand not just his words, but what this new role really meant. If Jerry was the archetypal tech geek, Then Bill had to be the student body president back in college. He was tall, taller than me, and undeniably handsome, with tousled blonde hair and striking blue eyes. I figured he'd probably broken more than a few hearts, I thought bitterly. Still, I felt a pang of disappointment when I looked down and spotted the gold band on his left ring finger. Cut it out, I scolded myself. Like he'd ever be into someone like you anyway. After wrapping up a rundown of his responsibilities, Bill shifted the focus to me. Not much to tell, I said. I was born in Tyler, lost my parents young, and spent some time in an orphanage. When I turned 13, I was placed with a foster family who raised me. They wanted me to stay close when I started college, so I enrolled at UT Tyler. I started off in math, but my foster dad convinced me there weren't many career paths in that field, so I switched to accounting. 4 years later, I had my CPA and ended up here. You got your degree and passed the CPA exam in just 4 years? Bill asked, raising an eyebrow. That's impressive. Most people need at least 4.5. Well, I lived at home, I explained, so I could take summer classes without much hassle. That helped me finish ahead of schedule. Well, lucky for us, Bill said warmly. The audit department usually hires full teams all at once. 6 months ago, we had another woman, Betty Murphy, but she left after a few months. So we were pretty short-handed before you joined. Why'd she leave? I asked, genuinely curious. Not really sure, he replied. She was here one day, gone the next. Guess she wasn't happy. So what's it like working at Consolidated, I asked. Bill's eyes lit up and he chuckled. First thing you should know, only the execs call it Consolidated. The rest of us just say COG. He grinned at his own pun. So yeah, that makes us just another tiny cog in the big old COG. I rolled my eyes. What's Mr. Jorgensen like? I asked next. He's demanding, Bill said, a real stickler for detail. But if you get your work done correctly and on time, he won't bother you. Just like my dad, I thought, or Professor Hunter back at UT Tyler. That last name made me blush slightly. I used to have a bit of a crush on Professor Hunter. It had never been serious, but it was clear I had a soft spot for confident, no-nonsense men. So, Bill said, jolting me out of my thoughts, what do you think of Houston so far? It's huge, I admitted. A little intimidating, honestly. He looked surprised. Is this your first time here? Now I was really blushing. Yeah, I've never lived anywhere but Tyler. My foster parents always wanted me close by. His expression registered brief surprise, then softened into a warm, disarming smile. You'll adjust, he said. It took Denise some time too, but she's getting used to it. Denise, I asked. My wife, he said, swiveling in his chair to grab a photo from his desk. He handed it to me, a snapshot of a beautiful young woman smiling at a party. Bet she was a cheerleader, I thought. Out loud, I said, she's stunning. Thanks, he replied. I think so too. Well, let me show you to your workstation, he said. Hey, Jerry, mind helping Annie Oakley here get familiar with the company intranet? And that's how I was welcomed into the audit team. During my first few days, I kept my distance from Buffalo Bill. I never did feel comfortable around the popular types. But he turned out to be approachable, genuine, and had a great sense of humor. Jerry was still a total nerd, but the more I got to know him, the more I appreciated his kindness. Mr. Jorgensen, however, remained cold and distant. Given the nature of our job, the three of us, Bill, Jerry, and I, ended up spending a lot of time together, not just working in the same cramped space, but also sharing lunch breaks. Our audit team was just one of about a dozen, and management encouraged team bonding during work hours to build strong collaborative dynamics. At the same time, we were advised not to form close ties with non-audit staff. After all, we might be reviewing their work eventually. A few days later, Bill was out on assignment during lunch, so Jerry and I were eating in the conference room when he asked, So, got a date for the company picnic? What picnic? I asked, genuinely confused. I haven't heard anything about it. They're holding it next weekend, Jerry informed me casually. It's a major event. All the top brass will be there, so attendance is mandatory. He explained that the company had booked an entire amusement park for the day. Supposed to be a blast, he added, grinning. Then he shot me a sly look. So, Are you going with your boyfriend? Caught off guard, I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I don't have one, I admitted quietly. His grin widened with satisfaction. Perfect, he said. Then how about coming with me? Immediately, my internal alarms went off. This was not good. Jerry, I'm not sure that's such a great idea. His face fell, his tone shifting. Oh, I see. Not good enough for someone like you, huh? He muttered, his voice tinged with resentment. Not good enough, someone like me? I was completely thrown. What was he even implying? Still, I needed to respond somehow. No, it's nothing like that, I mumbled. I'm just not really dating anyone right now. And, work stuff. It might get messy. Just then, to my immense relief, Buffalo Bill showed up and joined our table. Jerry didn't look thrilled, but thankfully the topic of rides and romance didn't come up again. After lunch, I went back to my desk, but my mind stayed stuck on that awkward exchange. The truth was, I wasn't great at navigating these kinds of advances. I'd clearly handled it poorly. And honestly, what had even made him ask me out? It wasn't like I was some knockout. Eventually, I settled on the idea that Jerry probably didn't date much either. Maybe he found any remotely available woman appealing, including me. Out of curiosity, I glanced over at the picture taped to Buffalo Bill's cubicle wall. His wife was in it, and she was stunning. Now that was someone you'd call hot. As the weekend approached and the company picnic drew closer, I wrestled with whether I should actually go. Social events weren't my strong suit, and aside from my immediate team, I didn't know many people. It would probably just be awkward small talk and me standing around alone. But skipping it seemed like a worse option, especially if the higher-ups were expecting everyone to show. So, reluctantly, I decided to attend. I double-checked the details with Mr. Jorgensen's secretary, and she assured me the dress code was completely casual. Taking her word for it, I dug out a faded pair of jeans that did a decent job concealing my plain legs and topped them with an oversized Houston Astros t-shirt. My goal was to blend in, not stand out. By the time I pulled into the amusement park lot in my old Toyota, the event was already underway. The invite had promised unlimited ride access, a barbecue buffet, and a generous supply of beer, ideal for a scorching summer day. A decent-sized crowd had already formed inside. At the gate, I showed my employee badge. The woman at the table handed me a marker and a blank name tag. I scribbled, "Hi, my name is Ann UX," and stuck it to my shirt. I hadn't taken more than a few steps past the entrance when one of the HR execs who had helped recruit me to Kyoji ambushed me with a grin. Thankfully, his name was printed on his own tag, because I wouldn't have remembered it otherwise. He squinted at mine. "Hello, Miss Oakes," he said, getting my name wrong. Not the first time that had happened. "Hi, sir. It's actually pronounced ox, like the tree," I corrected him politely. "Ah, right," he said, nodding like he understood. "So how do you like working at Consolidated, Miss Ox?" I let the mispronunciation slide again and answered his generic questions as best I could. Still, the whole interaction felt stilted, not just because of the dull conversation, but because I stood several inches taller than him. He had to keep craning his neck to talk to me. Not that this was anything new. I'd shot up early, and by the time I hit my sophomore year of high school, I was just shy of 6 feet tall. It had made me the tallest girl in the grade, and taller than most of the guys. Predictably, my social life back then had been pretty limited. After all, what teenage boy wanted to date someone who could look down at him? So yeah, I was used to this dynamic. Men physically looking up at me, both literally and sometimes figuratively. Thankfully, I spotted Mr. Jorgensen strolling nearby and jumped at the chance to exit the conversation. "Oh, there's my boss," I said quickly, waving to get his attention. "Mr. Jorgensen," I called out, heading his way. "Hi, I'm Ann Oakes." As I neared him, I noticed he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a woman dressed in a crisp, elegant outfit, someone who looked a good bit older than Mr. Jorgensen. He spotted me and greeted me warmly. "Hello, Miss Oakes. Glad you could join us today." Then, gesturing to the woman at his side, he added, "I'd like you to meet my wife, Edith." Turning to her, he said, "Edith, this is Ann Oakes, the newest addition to the audit team." Mrs. Jorgensen paused, her eyes scanning me slowly, head to toe, as if she were sizing me up. I couldn't help but feel like a curiosity on display. Probably my height, I guessed. Then, under her breath, she muttered, "Just what I figured." After a pause, she locked eyes with me and asked, "And where do you hail from, Miss Oakes?" "Tyler, Texas, ma'am," I answered. "Tyler?" she repeated with a faint smirk. "Well, I imagine you're not too heartbroken to leave that dusty little place behind." I was still trying to find a response when she turned abruptly to her husband. "Come on, Kurt. I want to talk to your VP before he guzzles too many Lone Stars." Then, looking back at me briefly, she said, "Have a pleasant afternoon, Miss Oakes." As she walked off, Mr. Jorgensen gave me a small, almost apologetic smile. "Enjoy yourself," he said, then turned to follow her along the cobblestone walkway. I stood there, puzzled. Why had she felt the need to belittle my hometown? Was that normal behavior here in Houston? And what did she mean? Just what she expected. Had I somehow rubbed her the wrong way without realizing it? Still mulling it over, I was nearly knocked aside by someone barreling past. It was Jerry Higgins, moving fast and reeking of beer. "Hey, Annie!" he called out far too loud. "I was looking for you!" He grabbed my arm to steady me, then grinned. "You've got to check this place out. Tons of fun rides, and the arcade's amazing. Oh, and we need to get you a beer." Before I could protest, he was already pulling me toward the beer tent. Just then, I caught sight of Bill Hitchcock walking toward us, holding 2 beers. "Buffalo Bill!" I called, relief in my voice. "Over here!" Jerry repeated with a chuckle. "Jerry, Annie Oakley," then grumbled as he let go of my hand. "You two go on ahead." I'm grabbing another round. He wandered off, tossing one last look over his shoulder. "What's going on?" Bill asked as he reached me. His expression changed when he saw my face. "Everything all right?" he asked with concern. "I think so," I replied slowly. But for a minute there, things felt a little out of control. At his urging, I recapped my lunchtime conversation with Jerry and how today had played out. "I'm not trying to be rude," I admitted, "but I honestly don't know how to deal with Jerry." Bill gave me a crooked smile. "Don't lose sleep over it, Annie Oakley. Jerry means well, but he's got no clue how to talk to women. Add alcohol to the mix, and he gets even clumsier." He chuckled softly. "But don't worry, he'll come in Monday hungover and full of apologies. You'll see." I hesitated, but Bill gently took my hand. "Come on," he said. "I want you to meet Denise." As we walked, I could tell he sensed I was still uneasy. "Seriously, don't stress about Jerry," he added. "I'm guessing you deal with that kind of attention all the time." "What? No," I said, startled. "Why would guys hit on me?" He gave me a curious look but didn't reply. Instead, he pointed ahead. "There she is." I followed his gaze and saw the woman from the photo on his desk. She wore designer denim that fit her like a second skin and a sleeveless white top that hugged her perfectly. Her hair was pulled through the back of a baseball cap, and she sported oversized aviator sunglasses. The whole outfit gave off a polished movie star incognito vibe. I couldn't imagine ever pulling that off. I always felt all sharp angles, elbows and knees. As we drew closer, I saw she was deep in conversation with someone familiar. "Wait," I said, squinting. "Isn't that Mr. Jorgensen?" Bill gave a sarcastic shake of his head. "That's Denise, isn't it?" he muttered. "She's constantly pushing me to climb the corporate ladder." Always got her eye on the next rung. Her drive was unmistakable. As we approached the group, Mr. Jorgensen seemed to spot us. Without missing a beat, he disengaged from his conversation with Denise and turned to go. "Sorry," he said briskly, "but I really need to catch up with Edith." And just like that, he was gone. Bill turned to Denise with raised eyebrows. "What was that all about?" he asked. "Doesn't hurt to touch base with the boss every now and then," she said with a shrug, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Before Bill could respond, her attention turned sharply to me. She gave me the once-over, much like Edith Jorgensen had done earlier. "And who's this?" she asked coolly. "This is Ann Oakes," Bill said. "She's the new addition to our team I mentioned before." Denise's expression shifted slightly. "Oh, right," she said, her voice flat. "Now I remember." She removed her sunglasses and gave me a second look. "That top would be a lot cuter if it weren't splattered in barbecue sauce," she added, deadpan. I looked down in alarm. Horror sank in as I saw several large red splotches right where Jerry had grabbed me earlier. I fumbled for a tissue, dabbing clumsily at the stains to no avail. Denise had already turned away. "I've got someone waiting," she told Bill. "I'll see you later over by the beer tent." Then, without any warmth, she looked back at me. "Nice meeting you, Miss Ox," she said with pointed indifference and walked off. Bill looked mortified. "I'm really sorry," he said quickly. "I have no idea what got into her. That's not like Denise at all." Then his expression changed as he caught sight of my face, tears silently slipping down my cheeks. "Please don't cry," he said awkwardly. He reached out with a napkin he had in his hand, as if to blot my shirt himself, but thought better of it and handed it to me instead. I tried wiping the stains again, but it was useless. Defeated, I turned and began walking toward the exit. "Annie, don't go," Bill called after me, sounding helpless. "It's fine," I said with a bitter little laugh. "I just need to get home and treat the shirt before the stain sets. Anyway, I think I've hit my limit for fun today." With that, I kept walking, shoulders hunched to hide both the sauce-stained tank and the embarrassment written all over my face. As I climbed into the car, I muttered to myself, "What a disaster." My Astros jersey was probably ruined. Every person I'd met had either been rude, dismissive, or flat-out strange, and I couldn't figure out what I'd done wrong. Once again, I found myself wondering whether taking this job had been a terrible mistake. The following Monday, Bill, or Buffalo Bill, as some like to call him, invited me to lunch. It didn't take long to figure out the real reason. He wanted to apologize again for everything that had happened at the picnic. I brushed it off, told him I'd already forgotten about it. But as our conversation unfolded, it became clear he had more on his mind, something personal. "I think Denise's behavior had more to do with what we're going through right now," he admitted. "She never really wanted to leave Dallas, and this whole move has been tough on her." He paused, then added, "Before I took this job, I told her I'd be on the road a lot." She knew what she was signing up for. At the time, she was excited about the opportunity. Big company, better salary, the whole package. He took a hefty bite of his sandwich before continuing. "But now that reality set in, she's lonely, frustrated. She misses having me around." There was an edge of fatigue in his voice. "It's not easy, and I think that frustration just boiled over. That's why she was so cold to you at the picnic." "I'm sorry, Bill," I said gently. "I can imagine how hard this has been for both of you." He gave a faint smile. "If we can hang on for the next couple years, I think I'll be able to save enough to finally do what I've always wanted. Open my own accounting firm in Boulder." "I've never been to Colorado," I said, surprised. "Actually, I've never even been outside of Texas." Bill's expression softened. He stared off for a second, lost in thought. "It's stunning," he said with quiet admiration. "Right at the base of the Rockies, where the plains rise up to meet the mountains. It's breathtaking. There's a wide range of outdoor activities available there," he told me, his voice full of excitement. "Even though the town itself is pretty small, the university brings in a lot of energy and things to do. I'd really love to move there one day." "That sounds amazing," I replied with genuine warmth. "What does Denise think about it?" His expression dimmed slightly as he answered. "She's more into the city lifestyle. But I really believe that if I could get her to give it a shot, she'd fall for the place just like I did." He seemed to snap out of his thoughts and looked at me again. "I didn't mean to go off topic," he said, "but I wanted to apologize on her behalf. That's not her usual behavior." I waved it off. Still, his honesty and openness made the mess of the weekend feel a bit more bearable. It was the first time in a while I felt like someone was starting to become a real friend, and I desperately needed one. What no one prepares you for in school about auditing, especially fieldwork, is how isolating it can be. Over the next 2 months, I was away from home at least 4 days a week. Building relationships or putting down roots was nearly impossible with that kind of schedule. When we spent the entire week at a site, we were allowed to return home on the weekends. But those 2 short days were usually swallowed up by errands. Sorting mail, catching up on bills, and trying to keep up with laundry. I ended up tossing half a refrigerator's worth of spoiled food before I realized it made more sense to buy less and cook at home when I could. And we couldn't really get close to the people working at the facilities either. Since we were auditing their work, we had to maintain professional distance. Usually, we were given a separate room to work from, only interacting with the locals in official meetings. This led to a lot of distrust and, at times, downright coldness from them. Overall, it made for a very lonely life. Given that, I wasn't surprised the turnover rate for auditors was so high, even though the pay was decent. The only saving grace in all of it was my team. Buffalo Bill turned out to be a real bright spot. We quickly became close. His sense of humor always managed to lift my spirits, especially when the stress piled up. But beyond the jokes, I found I could actually talk to him about my life, my worries, and he always listened. Without him, I might have packed it all in and gone back home to Tyler. Even Jerry ended up being better than expected. That Monday after the awkward picnic, he came to me and apologized sincerely for how he had acted, even though I told him I wasn't holding on to any grudges. I suspected he might still have feelings for me, given the way I sometimes caught him watching me, but I ignored it and nothing further came of it. He also turned out to be incredibly sharp when it came to COG's automated accounting system. Anytime something went wrong with the software, he had a knack for zeroing in on the issue, almost like it was second nature. After a few such situations, Bill and I were genuinely glad to have him around. The only person who remained something of an enigma was Mr. Jorgensen. As the senior director, he was responsible for liaising with the local management teams. He set the scope for our work, addressed any issues or concerns that cropped up during the audits, and communicated the final conclusions when we wrapped things up. His leadership style was distant and difficult to read. After our initial group meeting with the site managers, he would brief us on our tasks, share any special instructions, and then disappear for most of the day. However, several evenings during each assignment, he'd summon one of us for a private review of our work. Sometimes those meetings were to give context on unique situations we might run into during the audit. Other times, they were strictly performance reviews. He would critique our work and point out where we needed improvement. It felt more like attending a tough university class than being on a job site. Bill, Jerry, and I often speculated about him, trying to figure him out. Even though we rarely saw him during the day, it was clear he was always aware of what each of us was doing. He never gave compliments or acknowledged good work. He simply held us to a very high standard and expected us to meet it. The truth was, even though he never shouted, he had a presence that was undeniably intimidating. We respected him, but there was always a layer of fear beneath that respect. The first time he asked to meet with me for one of his evening sessions, I was nervous to the core. At the scheduled time, I knocked on his door, and he told me to enter. He was sitting on a couch, a notebook laid open on the coffee table in front of him. I walked over and stood silently, waiting as he studied his notes. Those minutes dragged. I tried to keep my hands steady and my breathing even. Finally, he looked up at me, face unreadable. "Your work quality is acceptable, Ms. Oakes," he said flatly. "Your pace is a bit slower than expected, but given that you're new, I'll allow that. However, I do expect to see progress. Your collaboration with the regional accounting department had gone smoothly, and you left a strong impression. That concludes today's session, Ms. Oakes," he said. "I'll reach out in a few days to schedule your next review." He turned his attention back to his laptop, and at that moment it hit me. I was being dismissed. As I made my way down the corridor, I felt oddly uplifted. I had braced myself for criticism, but instead he seemed satisfied with my performance. Then another realization struck me. He had even complimented my appearance. Catching a glimpse of myself in the lobby mirror, I noticed a subtle glow in my expression. Of course, that didn't prevent him from scolding me the next time for not strictly following COG's visual branding guidelines in one of my recent decks. After that feedback session, I returned to my room, irritated by the critique, yet more driven than ever to prove myself. I felt an intense need to demonstrate that I could rise to his standards. What intrigued me even more was watching how the other two interns responded to Mr. Jorgensen. Jerry had an aversion to him, rooted mostly in fear. Even though Jerry had a decent grasp of our internal systems, Mr. Jorgensen repeatedly exposed flaws in his logic. The kind of flaws that arose because the system didn't account for all the real-world exceptions we faced. When those inevitable problems occurred, Mr. Jorgensen would hold Jerry accountable for what he viewed as system failures, and Jerry resented that deeply. He didn't believe he was to blame, but the anxiety of being found at fault lingered over him constantly. Buffalo Bill, on the other hand, treated it all like a sport. He turned our audit tasks into a kind of competition, tallying mistakes and handing out fake awards to whoever messed up the least. I always suspected Mr. Jorgensen knew what Bill was up to, but Bill kept things light and rarely made real errors, so there wasn't much Jorgensen could take issue with. I think Bill's humor and refusal to be pulled into Jorgensen's power dynamics helped all of us stay balanced. Even Jerry couldn't help but laugh when Bill mockingly impersonated Jorgensen, complete with a Hitler salute and a comic goose-step march. But everything shifted during our trip to West Virginia. Charleston housed COG's shale oil division, and though the office itself wasn't big, the rapid surge in production meant headquarters was keeping a close watch. I'd never been to West Virginia. Then again, I'd never traveled beyond Texas. I figured the mountains would bring cooler temperatures. But Bill warned me in advance. The summers there could be brutal. So I checked the weather forecast, left my usual business suits behind, and packed some breathable summer dresses instead. Long enough to stay professional while staying cool. Turned out Bill's advice was spot on. It was a sweltering 93 degrees the day we landed at Yeager Airport. Mr. Jorgensen had flown in a day earlier, and once we reached the Charleston office, he promptly called us in to assign tasks. Until then, my focus had been entirely on accounts payable and receivable, so I was stunned when he gave me responsibility for asset valuation. I must have hesitated because he zeroed in on me. "Miss Oakes, it's time for you to leave your comfort zone," he said firmly. "You can't expect to stick with payables and receivables forever. You need to be adaptable. Didn't your induction cover valuation procedures? Is this going to be an issue?" I fumbled for words. "Yes, sir. No, sir. What I meant is, yes, I reviewed the valuation protocols, and no, it won't be a problem." He gave a curt nod. "Good. I expect your findings by tomorrow evening." With that, he moved on to brief Jerry and Bill on their assignments and dismissed us. During the ride back to the hotel, Bill glanced over at me. "I'm not sure why Jorgensen's singling you out," he said. "I've never seen him switch roles around like that." "Maybe he wasn't impressed with my last report," I replied, sounding more discouraged than I intended. "No way," Bill said quickly. "I checked your work. It was flawless." "You reviewed my work?" I asked, taken aback. "Of course I did, Annie Oakley," he said with a wink. "I was just watching your back." Then his tone shifted to something more serious. "Just stick to the process and double-check everything." "You'll do great," I nodded silently. No matter what Jorgensen threw at me, I was determined to earn his approval. As for Bill checking my work, I wasn't sure whether to feel annoyed by his interference or touched by his support. By the end of the next day, my doubts had faded. Everything appeared solid, and I had no difficulty mastering the appraisal procedure for rental properties based on the briefing materials. I felt a sense of assurance as I knocked on Mr. Jorgensen's door later that evening, shortly after dinner. He didn't greet me or speak at all when I stepped inside. Instead, his eyes stayed fixed on his laptop screen, seemingly oblivious to my presence. Eventually, he glanced up and gave me a look so cold and analytical, it made me feel like an insect under a lens. "Miss Oakes," he said sharply, "are you truly this inept?" The words hit me like a slap across the face. He didn't wait for a reply. "Your evaluation of the shale lease was completely off base," he said. "You ignored fundamental accounting protocols. Your entire day's effort was a waste of company time." His voice was like ice. "Well, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Panic began to rise in my chest, tightening my breath. This couldn't be happening. I think there's been a misunderstanding," I managed, my voice trembling. "I was careful. I'm sure the numbers were correct." He gave a humorless smirk. "Is that right? Then perhaps you should take a look for yourself." He turned the laptop toward me, and I saw the corporate accounting guidelines, COGS valuation standards, displayed in black and white. The correct methodology for assessing oil and gas leases was right there, plain as daylight, and it was nowhere near what I'd done. In that instant, all the self-doubt I'd fought to suppress for years came rushing back. How had I been so careless? How could I have failed so badly in front of him? I could feel my throat closing, tears falling before I could stop them. I stood there in silence, staring blankly at the floor, stunned. "You do understand," he said coldly, "that I'm required to document this failure in your performance file." His tone was devoid of sympathy. This will impact your evaluation and possibly your future here. My heart sank. I'm going to lose this job, I thought. How can I tell my family I wasn't good enough? That I blew it? Please, I whispered, desperate. Can I fix it? I'll recalculate everything. I'll stay up all night if I have to. That alone won't fix this, he said, his tone unmoved. Even if you correct your mistakes, I'll need to know it won't happen again. There has to be some consequence, a demonstration of commitment. I'll do anything, I said, my voice barely a breath. Just give me another chance, please. He examined me slowly from head to toe. Then, setting his laptop aside, he turned toward me fully. All right, Miss Oakes, he said at last. If you're truly willing to accept the consequences, I might be persuaded to overlook this failure. He motioned for me to come closer. I froze. What was he implying? What exactly was he asking? He didn't clarify, but he made it clear that there was no more to discuss. And somehow we went through with it. When it was over, he spoke in a clipped voice. You may go now. I expect a corrected valuation report on my desk tomorrow morning. I somehow managed to get back to my room, stumbling the entire way. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, I tore off my clothes, turned on the shower, and stepped beneath the water, desperate to scrub away everything that had just occurred. The stream of hot water did nothing to quiet the screaming in my head. He used his authority to manipulate you, one voice shouted. It's your fault for being careless. You deserved it, said another. I rubbed at my scalp as if I could erase the thoughts, but they refused to go. When I finally turned off the water, I was still no closer to understanding why I hadn't resisted, why I let it happen. The shame of my silence weighed heavier than anything else. With no other choice, I dried off, dressed, and sat in front of my laptop. I pulled up the company standards and began reworking the valuation from scratch. Immersing myself in formulas and spreadsheets was the only way to block out the flood of regret. I don't remember what I looked like the next morning, but the moment Buffalo Bill saw me, his face filled with concern. You okay, Annie? He asked, his tone gentle. I'm fine, I lied quickly. Just didn't sleep well. He nodded, but I noticed him glancing at me now and then as the morning dragged on. When Mr. Jorgensen entered the room later, my heart nearly stopped, but he didn't even glance in my direction. He said nothing at all about the night before. By the time he finished speaking, I had managed to collect myself somewhat. But just before walking out, he turned back to me and said, Miss Oakes, please come to my room after dinner. The blood drained from my face, and Bill immediately noticed the change in my expression. He looked at me, clearly worried, but before he could speak, Jerry jumped in with a smirk. Looks like Annie Oakley's in hot water, he joked. I slumped in my chair, unable to muster a response. Bill shot Jerry a sharp glare. Knock it off, Jerry. You don't know what you're talking about. Jerry, now sulking, turned back to his screen. Bill came closer to me. Are you feeling okay, Annie Oakley? You're as white as a sheet. I'm fine, I said quickly, grasping for any excuse. I think maybe I'm about to get my period. Bill's face turned red. Oh, I'm sorry, Annie. I didn't mean to intrude. It's all right, Bill, I said, trying to sound calm. I just need to step out for a minute. Then I rushed to the restroom. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face. The chill steadied me slightly. Somehow, I made it through the rest of the morning. At lunch, I only picked at my meal. Later, the guys invited me to join them for dinner at a place they'd found in Huntington. I told them I'd stay in and order room service instead. But the truth was, I couldn't imagine eating with the dread I felt. Knowing I had to go to Mr. Jorgensen's room later made me feel physically ill. Eventually, I pulled myself together. I dressed in the only pantsuit I'd packed, my one attempt at a kind of armor. Then I made my way down the hall, each step feeling like I was walking toward a sentence I couldn't escape. When I entered his room, Mr. Jorgensen was seated on the couch, a laptop open in front of him. I reviewed the asset corrections you made last night, he said. Everything meets COG compliance. Relief swept through me. Maybe this wouldn't be as awful as I feared. Then he continued. However, the mistake you made yesterday was quite serious. It cannot be repeated. It's my responsibility to make sure you remember that. Come here, Miss Oakes. And just like that, it began again. Afterward, I stumbled into the bathroom. Looking at my reflection, I hardly recognized myself. So this is what it feels like to be used, I thought bitterly. When I came out, he was already back at his computer, pants zipped, typing as though nothing had happened. "Good night, Miss Oakes," he said flatly. I understood I was dismissed. I somehow made it back to my room. I had never felt so hollow. Part of me wanted to flee, to run home to my parents and leave everything behind, but the idea of telling them what had happened made me freeze. They had warned me. I hadn't listened. If I went home now, I'd not only face their disappointment, I'd have to admit they were right. Eventually, I broke down in tears and cried myself to sleep. When the wake-up call came, I forced myself out of bed and got ready as best I could. The only thing pushing me forward was knowing we had a flight to catch that afternoon. I couldn't wait to get out of Charleston. Normally, Mr. Jorgensen would meet with us to wrap up the audit and outline our next assignment. The thought of seeing him again made my stomach twist. But as the morning went on, he never appeared. Then Bill got a phone call. After he hung up, he told us that Mr. Jorgensen had flown back to Houston early. Even more surprising, he wouldn't be joining us on the next assignment. Instead, the three of us, Bill, Jerry, and I, would head to Oklahoma City for a quick review of the COG branch there. Jerry groaned. "Why are we going back to OKC? We were just there not too long ago." "No clue," Bill replied. "That's what the boss said, so that's where we're going." In truth, both Bill and Jerry had already audited the Oklahoma office earlier this year. It was a small operation, and the last inspection hadn't uncovered anything unusual. Neither of them could understand why we were returning so soon, but I didn't question it. All I cared about was the fact that Mr. Jorgensen wouldn't be coming with us. That afternoon, during the seemingly endless flight, I found myself seated beside Buffalo Bill, who kept stealing glances at me from the side. More than once, I nearly blurted out everything, desperate to unload the burden. But shame clung to me like a second skin. I couldn't bring myself to speak, no matter how much it burned inside. Besides, I told myself he had Dennis to think about. The last thing Bill needed was my personal disaster added to his plate. I felt utterly isolated. We got into Okie City late in the day. Jerry and I went straight to the hotel to check in, while Bill, who was acting as our temporary supervisor, headed over to the COG office to meet with the local comptroller. That evening, over dinner, he shared the details of the meeting. "They think we're out of our minds," he said flatly. Apparently, the comptroller claimed there had been no changes in recent months and accused us of wasting everyone's time. "To be honest," Bill added, "the deeper I dig into this mess, the more I think he might have a point." We kept going over it as we ate, searching for something we might have missed. There was no use trying to take action that late. So we decided Bill would call Jorgensen first thing in the morning, to brief him and check for any issues we hadn't uncovered. The next day, when we got to the COG office, Bill immediately tried to call Jorgensen. He slammed the receiver down in frustration. "His assistant says he's out for the day," he said, clearly irritated. "So what now?" Jerry and I exchanged uncertain looks. The only option that made sense was to continue the audit as planned, sticking to our normal procedures. But even that idea fell apart. Mid-morning, the facility's accounting system suddenly went down. There was nothing left to do except sit around, waiting for the IT team to identify the issue and bring the system back online. We waited about an hour before getting an update. The news wasn't good. The server motherboard had failed, and we were told it would take 48 hours for a replacement to arrive and get things running again. "Well, that's it then," Bill muttered. "Let's head to the airport and try to catch a flight home. If they still want us to finish this ridiculous audit, we can come back Monday." We got to the terminal just in time to board a direct Southwest flight to Houston. We landed early the next morning. Jerry rushed off to grab the car and get home. But before I could follow, Bill caught my arm. "Hey, I need a word with you," he said. I tried to brush him off, but he wouldn't let me go. And honestly, I didn't have the strength to fight it. He led me to an empty gate and turned to face me. "All right, Annie," he said firmly. "What's going on with you?" "You've looked like hell the last couple of days. Something's wrong." "I'm fine," I replied weakly. "It's nothing." He took my hands, meeting my gaze. "I know you, Annie Oakley. I know when something's eating you alive. Please let me help." I looked at him for a moment, trying to hold it in. But I couldn't anymore. The tears came fast, and then I was sobbing in his arms. He held me gently until I pulled myself together. Then he stepped back, looked at me seriously, and said, "Tell me. I want to hear everything. And so I did. Once the dam broke, the words came flooding out. I told him everything. As the story unfolded, I watched the expression on his face shift. First disbelief, then horror, and finally outrage. "That bastard!" he yelled when I reached the end. "He took advantage of you." "No," I cried. "I mean, my body didn't resist." "That's not the point," he snapped. "He used his authority to manipulate you into something you didn't consent to." "But I was the one who made the mistake," I insisted. "If I hadn't botched the asset valuation, none of this would have happened." "Look," he said gently, "even if you made an error, it happens. We all screw up sometimes. You got them fixed overnight, didn't you?" He pressed the question. "I did," I admitted, "but he was the only one who caught the error." I felt crushed. I let him down. I let everyone down. I made a mess of things, and I should face the consequences. "That's nonsense," Bill shot back, clearly agitated. "At most, maybe a warning was in order, but this is overkill." Then his expression darkened. "Tell me you didn't touch him. You didn't say or do anything inappropriate, right?" "Of course not," I said quickly, offended by the suggestion. A long silence followed. Neither of us said a word for several minutes. Bill had been kind, trying to lift my spirits, but now I regretted ever opening up to him. He was the only one whose opinion really mattered to me, and now he knew. He knew what I had done. Worse, I was convinced he saw me differently now, like I was easy, like I was nothing. Why had I shared something so humiliating? Why couldn't I just suffer in silence? Suddenly, being near Bill became unbearable. I leapt up and ran down the terminal corridor, desperate to get away before he could follow. He hesitated long enough for me to gain a lead. Even through my panic, I realized I still had the runner's instinct. I knew then what had to be done. I dialed Mr. Jorgensen's office, and when his assistant answered, I calmly asked for his home address. "I've got some urgent documents he's waiting on," I explained. She gave me the address without pause. As I drove, I rehearsed everything I planned to say. It was simple. I would face him directly and demand a transfer to a different audit team. Not exactly a well-thought-out plan. If he said no, I had no backup, but I needed to take back some control over my life. And deep down, I knew this was also a way to disappear from the people who now saw the real me, or thought they did. By the time I parked in front of his house, nerves had taken over. I was trembling. Still, I made myself step out, walk up to the porch, and ring the bell. No response. A wave of relief passed through me. He must be out. But I forced myself to be sure. I circled around the house, and as I neared the back, I heard unmistakable sounds coming from beyond the yard's privacy wall. There was a small gate in the fence. I pushed it open slightly to peer in, then recoiled in horror. Oh, God. There they were, a couple, mid-act, sprawled out in a poolside lounge chair, oblivious to the world. Even from a distance, I recognized Mr. Jorgensen's dark hair. No wonder he hadn't come to the door. The noises they were making drowned out everything. A marching band could have stormed in unnoticed, and then something clicked. The woman with him, she wasn't his wife. That much was clear. She was far too young. But something about her rang a bell. I cautiously glanced again through the gate. The couple had switched positions. She was on top now, riding him with abandon, her voice full of vulgarity and heat. And then it hit me. Denise, Buffalo Bill's wife. I stood frozen, mind reeling. Just then I heard a vehicle pull up along the road. I turned and made a dash for the front, praying to escape before being seen. But my heart sank. Bill had just stepped out of his car and was walking straight toward me. I froze, unsure of what to do. He reached me before I could slip away. "Jorgensen's assistant said you were coming here," he said, studying my face. "You didn't do anything reckless, did you?" "Bill, we need to go now." I grabbed his arm, trying to tug him toward the car, desperate to avoid the fallout. But he stood firm. "What's happening?" he demanded. "What did you do?" Before I could answer, a loud cry came from the backyard. Bill's attention snapped toward it. "That was Denise!" he shouted. He rushed past me and pushed open the small gate I had peeked through only moments earlier. He froze at the scene in front of him. There was Denise, his wife, entangled with our boss. With a guttural yell, Bill charged the lounge chair. He yanked her off with such force that she flew backward, landing in the pool with a splash. "That's my wife, you sick bastard!" he roared, throwing a punch at Jorgensen's stunned face. He then turned to Denise, now climbing out of the water. "What the hell were you thinking?" he shouted. But to my shock, Denise stayed calm, her voice even. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Bill," she said. "But it doesn't change anything. I'm leaving you. I'm going to marry Kurt." The words hit Bill like a punch to the gut. He reeled, struggling to catch his breath. "You're leaving me? For Kurt Jorgensen?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Yes, Bill." "For Kurt," I said slowly, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "He loves me, and I've come to love him too. He's driven, unlike you. He can give me the kind of life I want." Bill's voice rose with disbelief. "Oh yeah? If he loves you so much, why was he with Annie Ox the other day?" I gasped, stunned. "How could you say something like that?" I cried, the words slipping out like an open wound. "I didn't mean it like that," Bill said, trying to soften the blow. He moved toward me, probably to comfort me, but Denise beat him to it. "You bitch!" she screamed, storming toward me with rage in her eyes and her hands like claws. "Stay the hell away from Kurt! He's mine!" Bill reacted instantly, grabbing her before she could lay a hand on me. I stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Then, movement inside the house caught my eye. Kurt stepped outside in a bathrobe, and behind him came officers from the Houston Police Department. "That man is trespassing and assaulted me," Kurt barked, pointing straight at Bill. Two officers moved toward Bill, placing him under arrest as the situation spiraled further out of control. After hearing everyone's side of the story, the police let me go. Bill, however, was led away in handcuffs. Denise and Kurt watched from the doorway. I could have sworn Kurt was laughing as I backed out of his driveway. That night I wandered through my own home like a ghost, my mind too overwhelmed to think or feel. I crawled into bed and fell asleep like a man who'd been executed, dead to the world. The next morning I somehow managed to get dressed and drive to work as if on autopilot. Bill wasn't there. Jerry was. "Well, look who it is," he sneered. "Little Miss Perfect. Too good to go out with me, but not too good to hook up with Kurt Jorgensen." My stomach dropped. If Jerry knew, then it was likely that everyone at the office knew. That suspicion was confirmed 15 minutes later when Human Resources called me in. I already knew what was coming, and I wasn't wrong. By noon, I was on the highway back to Tyler, jobless, disgraced, and drowning in shame. I felt like I should have had a giant red A stitched onto my shirt to wear home to my parents. I had almost given up on finding a new home when the Psyches offered to take me in. They had fostered many children before, and when they heard my story, they agreed to give me a place to stay. I can't say I loved them the way a child might love their biological parents, but they treated me with kindness and did their best to raise me well. They weren't warm or affectionate, but they were always thoughtful and protective. What they lacked in emotional closeness, they made up for in their dedication to my well-being. They were strict, sometimes frustratingly so, but their rules came from a place of concern, not cruelty. If you've ever lived in a group home, you'll understand how valuable it is just to feel safe. I never stopped being grateful for that, which is why it was so painful to tell them what had happened. But I couldn't lie to them. I told them everything. How I'd failed to stand up to Mr. Jorgensen, how I got fired from Consolidated, and what led to it all. They didn't say a word when I finished, but the disappointment in their eyes was louder than anything they could have said. Worse still, I knew they had been against my move to Houston from the beginning. My father had wanted me to stay home and help run the books for the family's rose farm, but I was determined to make it in the city with a big company. Now I had to admit that they'd been right. So I went back to work at the nursery. The first thing people should understand about running a rose nursery is that it's not so different from any other kind of farming. You're constantly battling the weather, pests, diseases, and market fluctuations. It's unpredictable and exhausting. Bookkeeping for a rose business might sound simple, but it isn't. My parents grew 6 major categories of roses, with up to 50 varieties in each. That's a ton of inventory to track. Their business sold not only to garden centers and large retailers, but also directly to home gardeners. Managing orders that ranged from a single rose to bulk shipments of thousands took serious organization. Over the next few months, I threw myself into the details of the business. It wasn't long before I figured out ways to automate the accounting process, and I was proud to help them streamline things. Still, I quickly saw how thin the margins were. Interest on seasonal loans ate up their profits, and one bad weather season or a market dip could wipe out everything. It became clear that they'd be working for a long time before they could think about retirement. Part of me had once hoped that, with success at Consolidated, I might be able to send them some help. But that dream had crumbled, along with so many others. Farm work was tiring. It wasn't glamorous or thrilling, but it kept my hands and my mind busy, just enough to distract me from everything I'd lost back in Houston. Still, there were evenings, quiet, heavy ones, when I found myself mentally revisiting every detail of what had happened. I could clearly recall the excitement I'd felt at the start of that new chapter in my life, stepping into a fresh role at a new job. It marked the first time I was truly navigating life on my own. Even during college, I hadn't experienced that kind of independence. After all, I had stayed with my parents for nearly the entire duration, except for one semester. I couldn't deny it. Landing a prestigious role at a powerhouse like COG had filled me with pride. But pride has its price, and mine came due when I miscalculated my rent budget, an error that cost me dearly. As a result, my supervisor, Kurt Jorgensen, singled me out, subjecting me to a level of intimidation that dragged up painful memories from the orphanage. And just like then, I felt defenseless. The experience was devastating, humiliating in ways I hadn't expected. Even now, the memory of it brings tears to my eyes. Eventually, I tried to explain myself to Mr. Jorgensen, but that led to a disastrous encounter at his home, one that sealed my fate. It wasn't surprising that I got fired the very next day. I should never have gone to see him, and truth be told, the original mistake that triggered all of this was just as foolish. The longer I sat with it, the more I believed I'd been naive to think I could handle life on my own terms, out in a world that had never made room for me. Back in Tyler, at least, I was in a small, familiar corner of life. This is where I belong, I told myself, though letting go of my ambitions hurt deeply. But maybe the world at large wasn't ready to pull me into its drama just yet. It was a chilly evening in autumn. I was working late, sorting through a stack of receipts in my modest office, when someone knocked at the door. Before I even lifted my head, I heard a voice I never imagined I'd hear again. "You're a tough one to track down, Annie Oakley." My heart leapt. I looked up fast, and there he was, Buffalo Bill himself, grinning from ear to ear. I sprang to my feet, threw my arms around him, half laughing, half in disbelief. "Buffalo Bill!" "What on earth are you doing here?" I asked, overwhelmed with surprise and joy. "Looking for you," he chuckled. "And let me tell you, that's been no simple task." He went on to explain that the only contact info he had belonged to Siagi, which hadn't gotten him very far. Then he remembered I was from Tyler and that my folks ran a rose farm. But that clue hit a dead end, since no rose growers in town had the last name Oaks. Then it dawned on him, I'd once told him I was a foster child. That likely meant I had a different last name than my adoptive family. So he came here and began checking out every rose nursery in town until he found the right one. Just then, my dad entered the room, probably curious about the unexpected noise. "Dad," I said, full of energy, "this is Bill Hitchcock. He worked with me at Consolidated." "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Sykes," Bill said, offering his hand. My father didn't return the gesture at first. He just looked at Bill with wary eyes and rested his hands at his sides. "It's not him," I quickly assured him. "No, Dad. He's not the one who hurt me." Bill was the one person in Houston who tried to help. My father relaxed just a little and finally extended his hand. "Sorry for the cold welcome," he said, "but Houston wasn't good to our Annie, and we're not exactly eager to see reminders of it." He turned to leave. "I'll let you two catch up, but don't stay too long. Annie still has bills to finish." "I won't, Dad, I promised." Once he was gone, I guided Bill to the small waiting area just outside my office. When we were both seated, I leaned in, ready to catch up. "So tell me, what's the story, Buffalo Bill? Last I saw, you were being hauled off in cuffs." A wry smile crept onto his face. "Spent the night behind bars," he said, "but they let me out the next day." Turns out Jorgensen dropped the charges. I'm sorry I couldn't be there, I told him, meaning every word. They called me the next morning and let me go. After that, I couldn't think about anything except getting out of Houston and heading home. Bill's expression turned grim. It's okay, Annie. Besides, he added, I got canned too as soon as I walked into the office. So now you're looking at an out-of-work accountant burning through his savings like there's no tomorrow. That hadn't even crossed my mind. God, Bill, what are you going to do now? I asked. He didn't hesitate. I'm finally going to do what I've always dreamed of, go back to Boulder and launch my own accounting firm. But before I can do that, I have to wrap up some unresolved business here in Houston. I thought I knew exactly what he meant. You mean Denise? Bill gave an exasperated sigh. Oh, Annie Oakley, that's just a storybook gone sour. I met with a lawyer about the divorce the day after I got out of jail. Denise didn't put up a fight. She was more than ready to be rid of me and run off with Kurt Jorgensen. She signed the divorce papers the moment she got them. The court finalized the paperwork, and now we're stuck in the mandatory 60-day waiting period. I reached out and gave his hand a comforting squeeze. I'm sorry, Bill. I know even if it was the right thing, it must have hurt. He looked into my eyes. Thanks, Annie. I'm nearly past it now, but yeah, it stung. I honestly believe Denise was the one. Just goes to show, you don't always know someone like you think you do. He straightened his shoulders. But that's not the full story. Turns out Kurt's been lying to her from the start. He never planned to leave his wife for Denise. Bill gave a bitter smile. And get this, he's done this sort of thing before. Remember Betty Murphy? She was part of the team before you came on board. I learned that Jorgensen pulled the same stunt with her as he did with you. That's why she suddenly quit. So it wasn't just me, I thought. Strangely, that brought me some measure of comfort, though I did feel awful for Betty. What about Kurt's wife? I asked. Why does she tolerate his behavior? Surely she knows about it. That's where it gets interesting, Bill replied. Edith Jorgensen seems to genuinely love the guy, hard as that is to believe. Not only does she put up with his affairs, she even helps clean up the messes he leaves behind. When Betty quit, I'm pretty sure it was because Edith paid her off. And Denise? One minute she was threatening to sue Kurt, the next she vanished from town, no explanation. I later found out Mrs. Jorgensen gave her a hefty payoff to make the problem disappear. That's bizarre, I said. Why would she hold on to him after all that? And if he's chasing other women, why doesn't he just leave her? Bill shook his head slowly. Why she stays with that scumbag, I'll never understand. But I can tell you why he doesn't leave her. Edith is the daughter of COG's former president. She's loaded and wields a lot of power in the company thanks to her father. She's not just a safety net, she's the reason he still has a job. I shook my head, stunned. Denise really believed he'd leave someone like that? I'll never understand people and the twisted things they do. I think I'll stick to roses. They're easier to read. But then I recalled something Bill had said a moment ago. If you're through with Denise and no longer at COG, what's keeping you in Houston? This time his smile was colder. That's the unfinished business I mentioned, Annie Oakley. I'm taking Jorgensen to court for destroying my marriage, and I'm going after COG, too, for enabling him. Don't you see? All those times we were traveling for background checks, and he wasn't harassing women like you and Betty, he was flying back here to be with Denise. Xiaoji knew what he was doing and chose to ignore it. In my eyes, that makes them just as responsible as he is. But I thought it was over between you and Denise, I said, caught off guard. I thought you'd be glad she was out of your life. I am, he replied firmly. But that doesn't mean I'll just sit back and let Kurt Jorgensen destroy everything I've worked for and walk away scot-free. And I'm certainly not going to let Consolidated Oil sweep this under the rug to shield him. I gave a slow shake of my head. I get why you feel this way, Buffalo Bill. But how can you realistically go up against a corporate giant like that and expect to win? You're right, Annie. The odds aren't great. Still, I can't just stand on the sidelines and let them roll over me without a fight. That's not who I am. Anyway, I found a lawyer in Houston who's built a career going toe-to-toe with COG. She's taken them down before, and she's agreed to take my case on contingency, so I'm not completely without hope. He paused, his eyes locking on mine. There's something else, Annie. I might have an ace up my sleeve. What do you mean? I asked. He looked at me almost impatiently. If you go back to Houston and testify about what Jorgensen did to you, we can establish a pattern that he's a serial predator and that Consolidated Oil knew and protected him. Your testimony could expose everything. A chill ran through me at the thought of being face-to-face with Jorgensen again. Oh, Bill, please don't ask that of me. I want to help, I really do. But I don't think I can go through that again. I've spent these past months trying to put it all behind me. Reliving it all, it's too much. I saw the disappointment flicker across his face. But beneath it, I noticed something deeper, concern. He leaned in and gently took both my hands. It's all right. Annie Oakley, I get it. I remember how broken you were when it all happened. I guess I hoped that with time and distance, you might have healed enough. The last thing I ever wanted was to make things worse for you. What about Betty Murphy, I asked. Wouldn't her testimony help make your case? Bill exhaled heavily. She won't do it either. She feels exactly the way you do about Jorgensen. I managed to track her down. She's been in therapy ever since she left COG. She just can't bear to go through it again. He studied my face for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. Forget it, Annie. I shouldn't have put that weight on you. It wasn't fair to ask. He reached out, tilted my chin gently so I was looking directly at him. But please, whatever you do, don't shut yourself away here on this old farm. You have so much going for you. You just don't see it. You're smart, capable, beautiful. But I know your rough past has clouded how you see yourself. It doesn't have to stay that way, believe me. He let his hand fall, suddenly looking unsure of himself. His stance grew stiff, almost nervous. Before I head out, there's something else I need to say. He paused, as if gathering courage. I didn't just come to ask for your help. I came because I miss you. I'd really like to see you again. A blush rose to his cheeks as he glanced at the floor, then turned toward the door. Just before he left, he turned back around. If you ever change your mind, if you want to talk or visit or anything, just call me. He hesitated, then stepped quickly toward me and planted a brief kiss on my lips before I had time to react. Without waiting for a response, he turned and headed for the door again. At the threshold, he stopped one last time. This time, his signature wide grin lit up his face. Hope to see you soon, Annie Oakley. And with that, he was gone. I sat there in a daze, bills forgotten in front of me. Buffalo Bill likes me, I thought, stunned. He said I'm pretty. I had always thought Bill was handsome. But back when we were both in Houston, he was married. So I became his close friend, and I assumed that's all I'd ever be. Earlier that day, I handed over the financial report to my father. He accepted it with a glance, then fixed his eyes on me. Is that boy gone? He asked. I gave a silent nod. Good, he said, his voice final. It's best we leave all that behind. I think I'll go for a walk, I murmured, and before he could respond, I stepped outside and headed toward the fields. Dusk was beginning to fall, but the fading light still gave me enough to see the soft hues around me. Those fields blushing with pink blooms always helped me think. Maybe Dad's right, I mused as I walked. The thought of returning to Houston made my chest tighten. I never felt at ease there. It was a place that seemed too sharp, too foreign. The idea of facing Mr. Jorgensen again made my stomach turn. In truth, I had never truly felt like I belonged anywhere. From my mother's home to the orphanage and eventually to this Rose farm, each move had chipped away at my sense of self. I never really settled, not even inside my own skin. Growing up parentless left scars that never quite healed. My awkward height, spindly limbs, and bony frame made me the punchline for other kids. Even when I realized I had a gift for numbers, it only made me feel more isolated. By the time the Psyches became my foster family, I had already mastered the art of invisibility. Staying unnoticed was the best way I knew to get by. But then there was Bill. He never saw me the way I saw myself. He told me I was beautiful. Could that be true? Had I changed without realizing it? Or was he just being kind, trying to win favor from a girl with nowhere else to go? How would I ever really know? As I wandered further, my eye caught something in the distance, a heap of old rose bushes abandoned near the edge of the field. They were the rejects, returns from customers who didn't want them. No longer sellable, they were cast aside to be burned later. I walked closer and studied the withering canes, twisted and bare, jutting in every direction. These roses had been deemed worthless, unwanted, rootless. Just like me, I thought. Tears sprang to my eyes, and I quickly brushed them away, embarrassed even in solitude. But then something stopped me. A flash of gold caught in the tangled mess. I bent down and stared in disbelief. A single yellow rose had bloomed among the dying. Despite rejection, despite neglect, despite being left to rot, it had flowered anyway. I stood still for what felt like forever, mesmerized by the quiet resilience of that blossom. Then I straightened my shoulders and turned back toward the house. Mom was in the kitchen, busy with dinner. "I'm going back to Houston," I said. I expected shock, maybe even protest. Instead, she looked up, tilted her head thoughtfully, and said gently, "Are you certain, sweetheart?" "Yes, Mom. I need to try again. Will you tell Dad?" She nodded quietly, and I hugged her tightly. "Thank you for everything." Upstairs, I began to pack. Buffalo Bill had left me his number, and the next morning, as I drove south on the highway, I called him. He sounded surprised to hear from me, but pleasantly so. "What changed your mind?" he asked. "It's a long story," I said, "but let's just say I'm not going down without a fight." We met in the parking lot of Hart's Chicken, and I greeted him with a bold kiss. He didn't say a word, but the grin that took over his face said enough. Inside, over a basket of Texas wings, he filled me in on the case. "The hearing's just a few days away," he said. "We're short on time. I've set you up with my attorney, Randy Rubenstein, this afternoon. She's a bit eccentric, but she's brilliant. Trust me." Miss Rubenstein's office was filled with oddities, books, plants, and art, and the woman herself was equally distinctive. No taller than 5 feet, round and graceful in her movements, she wore a suit jacket over a floor-length skirt. Her hair, a mix of pale peach and salt, was parted neatly down the center. She looked to be in her mid-50s, and her accent hinted at Eastern Europe. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened during the audit trip, every detail," she said, her voice direct and unsentimental. There was something reassuring in her bluntness, so I began to recount the events. But when I reached the part about the night in his room, I broke down. The emotion overwhelmed me, and I couldn't speak another word. She didn't flinch. She simply handed me a box of tissues and waited patiently as I tried to collect myself. "It's all right, sweetheart," she said softly. "Take your time. There's a method for getting through this kind of thing. It starts with taking yourself out of the equation. Picture it like a scene from a television show. Pretend you're simply narrating what the characters are doing on screen." Strangely, that shift made it easier. When I stopped using I and me and instead said she and he, the entire ordeal became less intimate, less painful. It became bearable to recount. Once I finished, she asked me to repeat it, this time starting from the end of the trip and working backward. By the time I reached the beginning again, the whole thing felt more manageable, less suffocating than before. Miss Rubenstein jotted a few things down in her notebook, then turned to Bill. "Bill, could you step out for a moment?" she asked. "I'd like to speak with Miss Oakes alone." I was startled, and Bill looked just as confused, but he rose without a word and left the room, shutting the door quietly behind him. I felt the tension rise in my chest. What was this about? "Why do you need to speak to me privately?" I asked, trying not to sound nervous. "First things first," she said gently. "Call me Randy and I'll call you Annie. We're on the same team here. I want you to be comfortable enough to say anything you need to. As for why I asked Bill to leave," she continued, "I want to talk to you frankly, and you may not like everything I'm going to say. I want you to feel free to respond however you need to, even if that means telling me to go to hell." I gave a nervous laugh. She didn't smile. I couldn't tell if she was joking or dead serious. "Annie," she said, "when we walk into that courtroom, the attorney for Consolidated isn't going to play fair. He'll try to make it seem like all of this was your doing. He'll portray you as some flirtatious young woman who tried to sleep her way up the ladder." I felt the blood drain from my face. "No," I whispered. "That's a lie." "You and I both know it's false," Randy replied calmly. "But that won't matter if we can't persuade the judge." "And right now," she said flatly, "I'd say our odds are below 50-50. My stomach dropped. She tilted her head, watching me closely. Bill told me a bit about you, she said, and I've had the chance to observe you myself. Would you like to know what I've noticed, and why I said what I did about our chances? I guess so, I replied, though I wasn't sure I did. Annie, she said, I know some of your history. I know you've dealt with more than your share of challenges. Frankly, I'm amazed you've held it together as well as you have. But the truth is, you don't radiate confidence. You shy away from attention. Even now, you're practically trying to disappear into that chair. I blushed, suddenly aware of how small I was trying to make myself. I believe everything you said happened in Kurt Jorgensen's hotel room, she continued. Your story was consistent. It was credible. But the way you told it, it was tentative, uncertain. And if that's how you testify in court, the way you carry yourself will contradict your own words. The judge might not believe you. Another blow to my gut. I knew she was right. This was a disaster waiting to happen. If Randy noticed how defeated I looked, she didn't let on. Instead, her voice softened. But I also saw something else in you, she said. Something I don't think you recognize. I looked up, unsure what she meant. I know you finished top of your accounting class, despite all the odds stacked against you, she said. I started to object, but she held up a hand. I also know you landed a highly competitive position at Consolidated, she went on, beating out not just other UT Tyler grads, but applicants from bigger, more prestigious schools. But the part that stands out most, she said, is this. You said no to Bill when he asked for help back at Tyler. And later, when it really mattered, you stepped up and took the leap. I want to know, where did that courage come from? It came from a yellow rose, I said softly. She gave me a puzzled look, but didn't press. Wherever it came from, she said, it tells me everything I need to know. You've got the strength to face this. You just need to remember everything you've already achieved and trust in your ability to do it again. I wanted to believe her. I truly did, but believing was the hardest part. Randy wasn't finished yet. I've got an assignment for you, today and tomorrow, she said. In the folder on my desk, you'll find all the case files, documents, affidavits, everything we've collected. I want you to read through every page tonight. Refresh your memory. Know this case as if it just happened yesterday. When we step into that courtroom, I don't want any surprises. And if anything comes back to you, anything at all, or you come across something new that could help us, she said firmly, I want to hear about it immediately. I gave her a silent nod, took the envelope she offered, and stood up to go. Hold on, she said, halting me with her voice. There's one more thing in there. I sat back down, suddenly attentive. There's something else I've noticed about you, Randy said, studying me closely. You use your clothing like armor. You're deliberately trying not to stand out, even though you're a beautiful young woman. It's like you don't want people to see you. Her words hit harder than I expected. You give off the impression of someone who doubts herself, she continued. But when you're on the stand, I want the jury to see someone self-assured. You need to feel different, so you need to look different. I hesitated. But this is how all my clothes are, I said, gesturing to my outfit. Randy didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached across her desk, grabbed a business card, jotted something on the back, and handed it to me. My daughter works at Nordstrom in the Galleria. She's a personal shopper. Bring her this card tomorrow morning. Tell her I said you need to look strong, poised, and yes, attractive. She'll take care of the rest. Out in the lobby, Bill was already pacing. He looked up quickly as I approached. Once we were in the car and pulling away from the curb, he asked what Randy had said. I told him, curious to see his reaction. He was careful with his words, but I could tell he agreed with her. And, honestly, so did I. I just didn't realize it showed so plainly to everyone else. What surprised me most was Randy's insistence that I overhaul my wardrobe. Have you ever heard of anything like that before? I asked. No, he admitted. But I think you should go with it, Annie Oakley. She's been locking horns with big corporations her whole career, and her success rate speaks for itself. I trust she knows what she's doing. I just shook my head, still trying to catch up to everything. Bill offered to take me somewhere decent for dinner, said we could do better than the motel's fried chicken, but I declined. Randy gave me a mountain of stuff to go through, I explained. I'll head back to the motel, dig into it. If I get hungry, maybe I'll order a pizza. He gave a small nod, but I could tell he'd been hoping for company. Back in my room, I opened the folder Randy had given me, and it was like opening a time capsule. Memories came rushing back all at once. The folder was packed. Company flyers, internal reports, training guides, corporate emails, financial documents. All of it had the distinct scent of COG, a place I'd hoped never to revisit. But if I had one advantage, it was this. I knew how to absorb information quickly, so I got to work. Around 10 that night, a detail in one of the documents made me pause. I flipped back to confirm, then grabbed the calendar and double-checked the date. Suddenly, it clicked. "You bastard!" I shouted at the empty room. I reached for the contact list Randy had tucked into the file. It was late, and I hated the thought of disturbing her, but my anger wouldn't let me wait. When she answered, her voice was groggy. "Randy," I said quickly, "I think I found something big." I walked her through what I'd seen and why it mattered. I could almost hear her smiling on the other end. "Don't breathe a word of it yet, Annie," she warned. "We'll keep it in the arsenal and fire when the moment's right." I agreed, hung up, and got ready for bed. The first part of the assignment had gone well, but I wasn't confident about the second half. The next morning, right at 10, I parked outside the Galleria and walked into Nordstrom. At the service counter, I handed over the card Randy had given me. Before long, a lively woman came striding toward me. I knew instantly this had to be her daughter. She looked like a younger version of Randy herself. "Hi there," she greeted with a bright smile. "You must be Annie Oakes." "I'm Mindy Cohen. My mom said you'd be stopping by today." As she led me away, I joked, "So, are you the Wizard of Oz?" "Here to give me courage?" She laughed warmly. "Not quite, but I can help you look like you've got it." We passed the women's clothing section, and I slowed down. "Wait, aren't we supposed to be picking out outfits? I need something to wear tomorrow." "We will," she assured me with a grin. "But first, we're doing some groundwork." She pointed ahead, to the salon. My eyes widened. "You're not planning to cut my hair, are you?" I asked nervously. Mindy just grinned and handed me the card Randy had given earlier. Scrawled across the back, underlined with emphasis, were two simple words. "It works." Ignoring my weak attempts to protest, she gently ushered me into the salon. 2 hours slipped by, and when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My hairstyle had been completely transformed, sleek and modern. Even more surprisingly, the young woman working on me was walking me through the steps of makeup application, something I had never once attempted. I felt dazed, like I was watching someone else's makeover. Afterward, Mindy steered us toward the clothing section. In the past, my shopping routine had been quick and mindless. Head into Walmart, grab whatever fit, pay, and go. But with Mindy, the process morphed into an elaborate mission. I tried on outfit after outfit, experimented with different cuts and sizes, and even stood for tailoring. By the end of it, I felt like I had run a marathon. Late that evening, Mindy finally loaded me into the car and drove me back to the motel. "Don't let anyone see you before court," she warned with a wink. "You're going to blow them away, and let it be a surprise." Alone in my room, I couldn't resist slipping into my new wardrobe again. The reflection staring back at me in the mirror looked like she belonged in a fashion magazine. The fit of the clothes revealed curves I didn't even realize I had. My arms and legs, once awkward and bony, now looked sculpted and strong. For the first time, the woman in the mirror looked composed, powerful. Maybe, just maybe, I thought, I've got this. The next morning, I had to hail a cab. I was still fiddling with the makeup and lost track of time. It took me much longer than expected to get everything on just right. By the time I arrived at the courthouse, the room was already filled and waiting on the judge. I drew a deep breath and stepped into the courtroom. Randy caught sight of me first. Her face lit up in a huge smile, and she threw me a thumbs up from across the room. Then Buffalo Bill turned to look. He glanced at me casually, then did a double take, eyes widening as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Annie, is that really you?" he muttered in disbelief. I simply smiled and took careful steps in my brand new 4-inch heels. As I made my way to the row reserved for witnesses, sliding into the seat, I crossed my legs and adjusted my pencil skirt so it settled just above my knees, then smoothed the short fitted blazer that hugged my shape. I straightened my posture, shoulders back, spine tall, just like Mindy had taught me. I might be panicking inside, I told myself, but no one's going to see it. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted Kurt Jorgensen. He stood stiffly by the defense table, peering in my direction with confusion. He didn't seem to recognize me. Good. Let him be the one on edge for once. The morning began with Bill taking the stand. Randy led the questioning, and then came the brutal cross-examination. My anxiety built steadily. After lunch, it was my turn. I whispered silently to myself, "You've got this, Annie. You're not the same girl who ran from COG all those months ago." Randy helped ease me in, guiding me through the events of that terrible week that started in Charleston and ended in Houston. I kept my back straight and tried to recount everything like I was narrating a documentary, detached, factual, composed. Then came the cross-examination. The opposing attorney approached, his boots echoing ominously across the marble floor. He wore a sharp Western-cut suit and looked down at his notes with theatrical calm before beginning. "Miss Oakes," he said, "on the evening in question, didn't Mr. Jorgensen discover a major flaw in your completed work?" I kept my tone measured. The method I used didn't follow the current company protocol for oil lease accounting, but it wasn't an error. "So," he pressed, "the work was incorrect by company standards, yes?" I held my tongue. "And Mr. Jorgensen reprimanded you for this, didn't he?" "Yes, sir," I said evenly. "How did that make you feel?" I didn't hesitate. I was stunned. I didn't understand how something like that could have happened. Could that issue have impacted your performance review? "Yes, it could have. And didn't you offer to fix the mistake somehow?" "Well, yes," I started, but he cut me off mid-sentence. "Didn't you suggest taking it up with Mr. Jorgensen, provided he was willing to overlook your error?" "That's not true," I protested. But he didn't let me continue. "So all of your interactions with him were entirely of your own doing and completely voluntary, weren't they, Miss Oakes?" "No!" I shouted again. "He forced me." With a dismissive motion, the attorney turned toward the judge. "No further questions at this time, Your Honor." Randy rose immediately. "Your Honor, I would like to conduct a brief cross-examination of my client." The judge nodded in agreement and motioned her forward. Randy leaned toward me and murmured, "Stay strong, Annie." "You've got this." Then, in her regular courtroom voice, she said clearly, "This situation appears to have stemmed from Consolidated Oil's internal accounting guidelines on evaluating oil lease assets." She held up a bundle of documents prominently marked with the COG insignia. "Ms. Oakes, are these the procedural documents in question?" I instantly recognized them, the same ones I'd reviewed back in the motel room. "Yes, ma'am," I answered. Randy passed the papers to the opposing counsel for examination. After a brief look from both Mr. Jorgensen and the defense attorney, the documents were formally entered into evidence. Randy returned to the stand, turning back to me. "Miss Oakes, I noticed a small line of text printed at the bottom of each page. Can you explain what that is and why it matters?" She handed me the stack once more. "It's the revision date," I explained. "Every time a procedure is updated, a new date is included to eliminate confusion." "And what is the revision date shown here?" she asked innocently. I read the date aloud for the courtroom. "And is that date significant to you in any way, Miss Oakes?" she asked. "Yes," I said with conviction. "It's the exact day Mr. Jorgensen attacked me." The defense immediately objected to my use of the word attacked, but the judge dismissed him with a wave. "I'd like to hear where this is headed, counselor." Randy remained composed. "If a policy is revised," she continued, "how are field auditors at Consolidated notified of the change?" I turned and looked at Jorgensen. He avoided my eyes. "Our supervisor is supposed to inform us of any updates," I said firmly. "Did Mr. Jorgensen notify you of this change?" Randy pressed. I looked straight at Jorgensen with contempt. "No, he did not. He assigned the task to me, knowing I wasn't aware of the last-minute changes. He orchestrated the failure and then exploited the situation." While I was finishing that response, the defense attorney jumped to his feet, shouting objections so loudly that the judge had to pound his gavel for silence. When order was finally restored, the judge shot a stern glare across the courtroom. I don't want to hear another outburst like that. Is that clear? He settled back into his chair with a sigh. We've had a full day of testimony, and it's getting late. We'll adjourn now and resume in the morning. He banged the gavel once more. Court is adjourned. Our team returned to Randy's office feeling upbeat. We made some serious headway today, Randy said with a broad smile. Bill was still trying to process it all. How did you even find out COG had changed its procedures? He asked her. Randy grinned. I always thought it was suspicious that Jorgensen suddenly pulled Annie from the assignment, especially since she was brand new, and it never made sense to me how someone could have made such a basic error. She looked at me proudly. But it was Annie who found the key when she caught the date of the revised procedures. Jorgensen had known changes were on the horizon, but the digital systems weren't updated until the exact day Annie happened to be working on her project. As for the hard copies, those likely weren't circulated until at least a week later. That was when Randy's assistant popped her head in. Ms. Rubenstein, there's a call for you. You're going to want to take this. It's the defense attorney. Without a word, Randy slipped into another room to take the call, and Bill turned toward me with a grin. Holy cow, Annie Oakley. When you walked into that courtroom, I nearly lost my eyeballs. Impressed by the makeover? I asked, fishing for approval. Impressed? I'm stunned. You've always looked great, but today? You look like you stepped off a runway. So what happened yesterday? He asked. I began recounting the afternoon I'd spent shopping with Randy's daughter at Nordstrom, but before I could get into the details, Randy burst back into the room, visibly buzzing with news. I told you we had them, she said. They're making an offer. $1 million each to settle. Bill whooped like a cowboy on a winning streak and started spinning around the office in celebration. But Randy's eyes were on me. I didn't join the party. No, I said firmly. Bill froze mid-step and stared at me like I just slapped him. No? Are you serious? I crossed my arms and let my jaw drop just enough to make a point. $2 million each for me and Bill. $2 million more for Betty Murphy, who endured the same abuse I did. And $5 million for the Houston Women's Center, I said, locking eyes with Randy. They'll also pay all legal costs. And one last condition. Kurt Jorgensen gets fired. Otherwise, Randy asked, we go back to trial. She gave me a long, searching look, then broke into a grin. Well, well, she said with a chuckle, our little Texas rose has grown some thorns. She turned and stepped out without another word. Bill, still trying to process it all, looked at me like I'd just flipped the whole world upside down. Are you sure, Annie Oakley? We won a round today, but there's no guarantee we'll win the whole thing. We could walk away with nothing. I met his eyes, confidence burning behind mine. I didn't return here to accept crumbs, Buffalo Bill. If they want to fight, then I'm ready for a fight. Just then, Randy strode back in. This time she wasn't smiling at first. I couldn't get exactly what you asked for, she began. Then her lips curled upward. I got $5 million for you, $3 million for Bill, and $10 million for the Women's Center. The room exploded. We jumped to our feet, laughing, shouting, embracing in disbelief and joy. Oh, and one more thing, Randy added as we caught our breath. Kurt Jorgensen? Terminated. Effective immediately. Consolidated's already handed over his case file to the DA. She paused just long enough for the kicker. His wife's had it with him too. She's filing for divorce. The celebration became real after that. Randy had dinner delivered and even brought out a bottle of champagne she'd been saving for something special. As the first round of glasses were poured, I raised mine. To Randy Rubenstein, I declared, who went up against a giant and won. We clinked glasses and drank. Then Bill poured another round and lifted his glass in turn. To the new Annie Oakley. Fierce, fearless, and absolutely stunning. My cheeks burned, but they wouldn't let me deflect, so we toasted again and finished the meal in high spirits. Later, as Randy walked us out, she gave us a warm but firm send-off. You two go on. I still have court in the morning to finalize everything. Bill and I both gave her a grateful hug and stepped into the evening air. As we approached his car, he turned to me, gallantly. Want a lift to the motel? I shook my head. No, He blinked in surprise, unsure, but I gave him a soft smile. Remember what I told you, Buffalo Bill? I didn't come back here to settle for half a loaf. I want to spend the night at your place, I said. He turned in his seat, eyes locking with mine, and asked, Are you absolutely sure, Annie? I didn't answer. Instead, he hit the gas and we vanished into the night. In the courtroom, I had felt unstoppable, confident, in control. That confidence stayed with me as I turned to Buffalo Bill and asked him to take me home. But once we stepped into his apartment, standing in his living room, that strength faltered. My eyes dropped. I couldn't meet his gaze. Bill, on the other hand, didn't hesitate for a second. He simply lifted me up and carried me straight into the bedroom. The following morning, as sunlight filtered in, he turned to me and asked, Now that you're wealthy, have you figured out what to do with it all? Actually, yes, at least part of it, I replied. I'm planning to give half to my foster parents and Tyler. They were there for me when no one else was. It's time I gave back. I looked over at him. And you? What are your plans, Bill? His answer came without hesitation. I've got it all mapped out. I'm heading back to Colorado to start my own accounting business. Then he paused, nervous for the first time. Annie, Look, what I mean is, would you consider coming with me? Only if you want to, of course. My voice was steady, full of emotion. Yes, Bill. More than anything, I do.